My guest today on Creative Inspired Happy is V.E. Schwab, #1 New York Times bestselling author of 25 books, including The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. Her latest book, Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil, is out now. Today we talk about the curse of perfectionism and how Victoria copes with it, why it's important to her to share both the victories and disappointments in publishing, the part of Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil that Victoria rewrote at the last minute to the chagrin of her publisher, why defining books and genres is a box that writers and readers should actively fight against, which part of writing is her most hated and which is her favorite, whether her poetic prose comes in the first draft or later in the editing phase, and so much more. Creative Inspired Happy is a video podcast featuring interviews with the biggest names in books as well as rising literary stars about what made them fall in love with stories, why they write, their biggest successes and disappointments, and of course their latest books. All hosted by me, New York Times bestselling author Evelyn Skye. Join our warm community for free to get behind-the-scenes insights about author life, book recommendations, the opportunity to ask questions of upcoming podcast guests, and more. Just go to creativeinspiredhappy.com or follow the link in the episode notes. I hope you enjoy the show. Hey, Victoria. Welcome to Creative Inspired Happy. It's so great to see you again.
It's good to see you too.
I'm thrilled to have you on the show. We were just chatting before we hit record that it's been years since we've actually been in the same room together, but we've been following each other's careers, and it's just so exciting because you have a new book out, which we're definitely going to talk about. You are in the UK right now, I believe.
I am. I live in Edinburgh, Scotland, and I have for on and off about 8 years.
That's really exciting. So that actually, my first question is, having lived in different places, does that affect your writing and your reading tastes?
Oh, I don't know if it affects my reading taste, but it definitely affects my writing in that I think I probably do 95% of my writing here. I actually live in Portobello, which is the seaside community out just on the outskirts of Edinburgh. But yeah, I do almost all of my writing here. It's just from the moment I got off a train for the first time here, like more than a decade ago, almost 14 years ago, I just felt all of the silt in me settle to the ground. And this is the place where I feel most creative. It helps that it's a very haunted, weird country. And I love it. And I don't know, there's just something about the atmosphere. Maybe it's also being 5 hours ahead of publishing. I just feel like I get to wake up and the morning is mine. And I have my little routines and rituals. And by the time New York comes online, I've at least made a dent in my own creative capacity.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So are you a morning writer?
I am in that if I don't start in the morning, I won't start in the afternoon. And if I start in the morning, I will have momentum into the afternoon. But I don't know if you're like this too. The later in the day it gets that I have not started, the more excuses I can find to not start.
I'm not like that with writing, but I'm like that with exercise and also with
Oh,
my French lessons. And so I keep
interesting.
thinking that I need to prioritize that and get my workouts done. Like maybe I should wake up earlier, but I will
Uh-huh.
always write because that's the thing I want to do. And I have to
Yeah.
stop myself because once I start, then the exercise will just not get done. And I will probably never learn French.
Oh, see, that's the thing. I will use exercise as an excuse to procrastinate on every single task that I have because I need the immediate gratification of the endorphins. And I also exercise makes me famished, always has. I was an athlete in my teens. And so now I have to like pair exercise with a meal. So I have to time it to a certain period of the day. But I feel like my window of writing has narrowed with my anxiety and my neuroses and time because I also have to stop writing a certain number of hours before I wind down for the night, or I just have severe insomnia.
Mm.
And I can't turn my brain back off. It's always a little questionable about whether I'll be able to turn my brain back off. But if I don't stop writing before, say, 5 p.m.,
Mhm.
it's going to follow me into my evening and into my night.
Oh, that's so interesting. And you have always been so open about your personal struggles with anxiety or, earlier in your career with maybe some insecurity. How have you overcome these personal challenges to have such
Oh.
a long career and very successful?
I know we were saying before this recorded that I think we saw each other for the like last time like 10 years ago. And the mortality rate in publishing is so wild that the fact that we're still both here is just a testament to stubbornness and energy and ambition, right? I don't think I have overcome it. It's something that I deal with every single time I sit down to work, every single day. I on my own podcast had an interview with somebody who did not have imposter syndrome, and all I could think was like how much energy that must save them. Because I don't experience that. I definitely have a mental hurdle every time. I think what I have learned is I've learned coping strategies. So I've learned what I need in order to get out of my own way, or in order to kind of quiet the inner critic or quiet the fear that I don't have enough story or that it's not strong enough. So I've always been a planner, but I used to need a vague idea of a story before I would kind of dive into working on it. And now 25 books in, I need to know everything. I want to know my sense of my story and my storytelling and my world and my character. I want them to be ironclad before I sit down to actually draft. And what that allows me to do is that it allows me to just enjoy the word craft of an actual first draft without the doubt getting in. Because I'm somebody who I worry there's not enough story. I worry there's not enough pace. I worry it's not strong enough or epic enough or big. And there's just an ongoing litany of negative voice in my head. And so the more I feel empowered by the story I'm telling, and the more conviction I have that it's worth telling, and the more excited I am about the eventual ending of it, the less likely I am to talk myself out of writing it. And so I kind of have just required more and more information the more books I've gotten on. So I wouldn't say I've ever overcome it, but I found ways to work through it. And the other really big thing that I found, and this was in the wake of The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, which was my 20th published book, but for many new readers was my first. And one of the reasons that book took almost 10 years to write and then almost didn't get written was perfectionism. I have an extreme perfectionism complex. It's something that I've always struggled with. And so I didn't want to write something imperfect. An idea is perfect by virtue of the fact it hasn't been written down. And writing an idea down is the act of making it imperfect. And I white knuckled that entire drafting process. But what I've traded perfection for these last couple of years is purpose. Instead of asking myself if a story that I'm working on or have worked on is perfect, which it can't be, I ask myself if it has achieved its purpose. What was the purpose why did I want to write it? What did it mean to me? What was I trying to say or achieve? And then if I can look back at a work like Bury Our Bones, which is to date the closest I've ever come to achieving the idea in my head on paper. And to me, that achieved its purpose at the same time. I try to exchange perfectionism for purpose these days, and that helps.
That's really going to be so helpful, I think, to a lot of our listeners and our viewers. Yeah. For me, my next book that's coming out is The Incredible Kindness of Paper. And I had maybe a similar feeling where I was almost afraid to write the story because it meant so much to me. That purpose meant so much to me that I was afraid that I wouldn't do it justice. And so I had said to my agent, I'm not even going to write this book if it doesn't come out the way that I want it to, if I don't find the right editor, the right publishing house that understands what it's going to be. And how do you get over that hump? Because I feel like it's great to separate perfectionism and purpose, and yet there's still a little bit of that, what if you didn't meet your purpose?
I mean, the truth is you don't in the first draft. I think that's one of the hardest things to reckon with, is that the first draft that you write down on paper is by definition the farthest from the idea in your head that the story will ever be. And that the act of revision is the act of decreasing the distance. But I think I struggle with that too. I mean, it's terrifying that you have to make something before you can make it better. And therefore, there is this terror that takes hold, right? As you put the thing down on paper and it doesn't equal the idea in your mind. So even once you put away the perfections, and you're still left with something that isn't as good or as meaningful or as purposeful. But I think that's where, we have to embrace revision and editing. We have to seek out counterpoints and creative people in our lives, editors, agents, team members who can help gut check us. And we can say, I remember my editor, Miriam Weinberg at Tor, I've worked with for 13 years now. And the thing that I love, not only has she continued to hold me to account with every book, in a way that not every editor would. But when I'm starting, she makes me tell her what I'm trying to achieve, so that then as I turn in drafts, she can hold me accountable, not for the work that I'm just turning in, but for the work that I was trying to do. And I remember when I turned in the first version of Addie, it looked wildly different from the finished version. And she basically said, this is a great book, but it's not doing everything that you told me you wanted to achieve. And so we were able to work together to bring those two visions closer, because I think we, by nature of the work, we get too close to it, right? And then we need to be able to step back from it, or we need people to be able to pull us back a little bit. But I think it's not a satisfying answer to say you can't write it right the first time, but you can't write it right the first time. We require iteration. And then the hope is that by the time we write it for the last time, by the time we are putting the final touches on it, we can see that purpose. But basically, I'm not done with the book until the purpose is there. And I will take as many rounds as it takes, even if it means delaying a release, even if it means, having that hard conversation with myself creatively, and having people in my life who will have those hard conversations, to make sure that by the time the book hits shelf, the purpose is there.
Would you say that also when you're done, maybe there's just one more step left, and that is the reader then bringing their experience to that story, and so that your job is to get that book to that purpose, to that point where then the reader can take it that very final part of the journey?
I mean, absolutely. But it's tricky, isn't it? Right? Because we can't ever predict what a reader brings to it. And every reader is going to bring an entirely different experience. That's why I always like to say, as the author, we control 50% of the story. And then the reader controls the other 50%. Now, we cannot police what the reader brings to it, nor can we anticipate what the reader brings to it. We can hope that they close the circle with us, but it is not a part that we have creative control over, right? So you're right. The book becomes a dialogue. We start out as a monologue, and then it becomes a dialogue, and then we basically hand it over, right? I say dialogue, but our conversation is on the paper, and then their conversation is engaging with what's on the paper. So it's one of the hardest things to kind of come to terms with, is that even if you write a book that achieves exactly what you want, it might not achieve that for a reader, or it might be more than that for a reader. But I try really hard to let the reader's experience be the reader's experience, and to hope that obviously they find different nuances, things speak to them in different ways, while also acknowledging that I can't rely on it. So I have to get my purpose down on paper as authentically as I can for me, knowing that that's where my contribution is going to end. And I'm not going to be able to sit in the room with everybody reading it and say, oh, but make sure you think about the fact when you hit this part of the book that Charlotte is an unreliable narrator and that you'll only actually get the story from her perspective. So I'm not going to be there. So I have to make sure that the parts of me that are most important get onto paper, because that's the only way that I'm going to be part of the conversation.
I love that. Okay, let's talk about Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil. So I am lucky enough to have an early copy here.
Yes.
I'm sure you probably have your author copies that are prettier, even prettier than this. But this, as you said, is the book that you think maybe your idea matches the most to what you actually got on paper. For the listeners and viewers who don't know the story yet, tell us a little bit about it.
Bury Our Bones was born in the wake of Addie LaRue. And that's not to say that you need to read Addie in order to read Bones. They are set in the same world, but they are two standalone novels. But the way I say that it's born in the wake of Addie LaRue is Addie was a story about immortality and hope. This is a story about immortality and hunger. It's about the hunger to be loved, but also the hunger to be seen, to be known, to be accepted, to take up space in a world that tells you repeatedly to be smaller and to want less and to hunger for less. It's the story of three women over the course of nearly 500 years and how their lives and deaths and lives intertwine again. I don't want to say much more than that because it's spoilery, but I mean, it has revenge and it has lovers to enemies and it has collateral damage and it is about queer history and it is about agency and autonomy and the inherent violence of moving through the world in a femme presenting body and how revolutionary it is to go from being the prey to being the predator.
Oh my gosh, that sounds amazing. The title itself is also haunting and evocative. Is
Thank
there an
you.
origin story to the title?
Yeah, I wrote the poem that's at the beginning of the book before I wrote the rest of the book. And this traditionally for me is a little bit of a back matter situation. I come from poetry, that's where I started. And so I tend to have a phrase or a sentence or a line of poetry that I write that informs a novel. And it doesn't necessarily always feel like a line of poetry, but for me, it has a rhythm and a cadence. So in The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, it was two pieces. It was Darling, I Was the Night Itself, which is Luke's, and it was Never Pray to the Gods That Answer After Dark. For my very, very first novel, The Near Witch, it was The Wind on the Moors Is a Tricky Thing. For each of my books, it's been something different. But for this one, for some reason, I wrote an actual quartet. I wrote an actual 4 lines. And I did it just to kind of give myself the gothic vibe of it, the atmosphere, knowing that whatever poetic line I used was going to kind of be used as a cadence measure, as almost a metronomic beat for me to have the music of the text. And so it was bury my bones in the midnight soil, plant them shallow and water them deep, and in my place will grow a feral rose, soft red petals hiding sharp white teeth. And it was just, I remember walking in Brooklyn in like 2021, just like repeating this like a mantra over and over to myself, trying to find the way in, and just knowing that that was the thing I wanted to capture. I love this idea of Gothic literature. I love the idea of like a vampire novel hiding itself as a historical fiction, hiding itself as a literary work, hiding itself as just this deep little existential drama. I wanted it to feel like an epic, and I wanted it to feel like an epic poem. And then, of course, the title, Bury Our Bones, is because this isn't the story of one woman, it's the story of 3.
I love that. This book has been described as genre defying,
Hmm.
and you've written across different genres, for different age groups during your career. How has that evolved over the course of your publishing life?
I mean, you know this, like publishing puts us in boxes, it puts us on shelves, it tries to delineate for marketing purposes where we are, but often it can feel like a qualitative assessment as well. And I remember Addie LaRue, for some reason, got shelved in general fiction instead of fantasy. And I was grateful for it because it meant more people found it. But I was also fascinated by the number of people who then became evangelical about Addie LaRue and in the same breath insisted they didn't like fantasy. Because Addie LaRue is a fantastical historical novel set over 300 years about a deal with the devil. It is fantastical, but it made me realize that we have something in our mind when I say the word fantasy. We hear it with a capital F. We hear wizards, we hear cloaks and spells and swords and dragons, and that is a version of fantasy, but the category is so much broader. Anything which has a point of departure from reality is fantasy. All of my works have one point of departure from reality. Some of them have multiple, but most of them are fairly grounded in our world. They simply pull magic into it instead of asking us to step out. To use the 2 dead white men, I always say it's like Tolkien versus Lewis. Tolkien tells you that you can escape into Middle Earth, but only through the pages of this book. And Lewis says somewhere in your house is a wardrobe with no back. And what Lewis does by saying that is says magic is in your world. It's up to you to find it. So I've always had this kind of grievance with the boundaries of fantasy and with people who think they don't like something because they don't like one iteration of it. And so my little defiance over the last 5-6 years has been kind of searching for ways to make the cross-referencing of genres feel additive, not narrowing. So I think that if you like fantasy and you like romance and you like horror, it shouldn't, the circle in which your book exists shouldn't become smaller. It shouldn't only be the Venn diagram overlap of those 3 places. It should be expansive. It should branch out. And I did that with Gallant, which could be a middle grade novel, could be a YA novel, could be an adult novel. It's, in my mind, an adult novel about a 14-year-old protagonist that has illustrations, but also is one of the darkest things I've ever written. So I think the one luxury of success is that I have become deeply averse to classification because I think it's inherently limiting in a way that I don't think readership needs to be. And I also think that when readers self-limit, they diminish their own resources. They suddenly are reading the same thing over and over again. And authors writers are reading the same thing over and over again. And I think we need creative cross-pollination to thrive. We need to read outside of our space and pull things in. And so, yeah, for me, this book is a horror, a romance, a literary, and a genre. And the goal is that I think it could shelve in any of those sections. And I hope that it shelves in none of them.
I think that's amazing. You really answered a question that I was about to ask you, which was, is this a luxury of success? Do you get to write genre defying books, things that don't fit in a category because your name is known?
Yeah, go ahead. So sorry.
Oh, no. I mean, I think that there are certain things that we get to do as our careers progress. And I guess I'm wondering if there's advice for anyone who's starting out.
Here's the thing. It is a luxury, but it shouldn't be as hard as it is. Like, it's also a hyper gendered luxury. You see, this is not a luxury that most straight white male authors have to fight for. I am amazed by the number of authors of that contingent whose work automatically gets shelved in literary or automatically gets shelved in general fiction, despite the fact that if it had been written by somebody else, it would have been shelved automatically in YA or automatically in fantasy. It's a luxury that extends first and foremost to a certain subset of the industry. And if you are not that subset of the industry, I do think the road is inherently harder. I think Addie LaRue helped me because it gave me a leg to stand on. I think that it's still a boundary that I will have to fight with each and every single book that I write. So it's not something where you conquer that threshold once and it's not a club. It's not like the SNL club where you get a jacket and then you're inducted into it. It's amazing to me that I probably will be having that conversation about fantasy and what it means and what its boundaries are and aren't. It will be the TED Talk I give until the day I die. It will be the hill that I fight on as well as die on. It will probably be one of the great conversations of my life, is to just continually insist that almost everything you like is in some way fantastical. So I don't know how to advise except to say to writers coming up, read as broadly as possible, understand the landscape, not only of the shelf that you think that you belong on, but the shelves that you think you don't. Understand and don't let it limit your ambition. So often, and I know this is an easy thing to say from the lens of success, and I remember coming up for years how hard it was, but don't limit yourself before the industry tries to limit you. We spend so much time thinking about, where's my book going to fit? How should I adjust my story to better position it in this quadrant of the market? But you and I both know we don't control the market. We don't control trends. They don't make any sense. And by the time, if you sat down, you're like, wow, romantasy is really big right now, I'm going to write a romantasy. By the time you finish it, sell it, and it's coming out, we're moved on. So that way lies madness. I think that what you do is be as ambitious as possible. Be defiantly ambitious in the stories that you want to tell. I think the things that are cracking through are the things that are unapologetically grand, are the things that swing. I know as a reader, I read 120, 130 books a year. And as a reader, I don't actually care if a story succeeds in every way that it set out to succeed. I care that it's trying something bold. And I think that meekness will be the death of a lot of extraordinary creative work.
I love that. And being bold keeps us from having too many generic books.
And also, at the end of the day, you will never control how well your book sells. You will never control how many copies it sells, but you can control whether you are proud of the thing that you wrote. And I think that also the resiliency is key, whether it's spite, hope, whatever drives you, because if you write enough books, there will be some that sell better than others. And the better they sell, the more your backlist will benefit. We both know this. It's you want to have a backlist. You want to just relentlessly keep writing. And I always tell young writers, you have to keep writing, because if your book does well, you need another book. And if your book doesn't do well, you need another book. So all roads point to just keep writing. And the reason you do that is not just because you're banging your head against a wall. The reason you do that is because I'm 25 books in now, and one of them is out of print, and everything else has earned out. And it's they were really small deals, most of them, but they have, So one's out of print, the Unbound. The Archive and the Unbound are my frustration of publishing, right? But if you take that series out of it, like everything else has continued to find new readers, sometimes a few, sometimes many. And you are building a house for yourself, right? And every single brick in that house is a book. And the more bricks you build, the stronger the house, the bigger the house, the more people can find you. And so I truly think that like sheer stubborn storytelling is one of the best things that you can do.
I completely agree. And I think that earlier on in my career, it was really hard not to put all of my hopes and dreams into every single book, the book that was coming out at that moment.
Yeah.
And I still do that to a certain extent. But, so 10 books in, I'm not quite halfway to where you are, but
it's a lot though.
I've definitely had some flops. And they might have devastated me earlier in my career, but now I have that ability to move forward, right? I can say, hey, I put my all into this story. I think it's a great story. It found its readers, but now I'm on to the next thing. And like you said, you are building your catalog, right? This is
also
your house.
Even something that you consider, or that like a publisher considers a quote, a flop, even something that underperforms. For somebody out there, that's their favorite book.
Yes.
Like that's their book. And I think that's so important to remember is we think of like the only measurement is how many copies it sells because this is our job, right? And there are so few metrical measurements for us. There are so few ways that we can measure success so that of course we become bound by the numbers. We have bills to pay. We need to do well enough that we continue to be able to have this job. But if you're able to do that and put that aside for a second, I am continually reminded that my worst selling books are somebody's favorite book. And like, it's so weird because it's like the only part of this industry that's gotten easier for me is bad reviews. And those bad reviews have gotten easier because I don't actually mind if my book is not somebody's favorite book because I know that it is somebody's favorite book. And I hope the person for whom it's not their favorite book finds their favorite book. But I think that like, as long as you are putting out work, as long as you're able to get out of your own way and start stories and finish stories and continue to grow and get better and let yourself improve and like be humble enough to put in that work and let yourself be told that it can be better. I mean, I've rewritten from 2 books from scratch in my entire career. It's not fun to not nail something, right? To need to rework it. But again, it becomes worth it when you find out that that book found somebody at the exact right moment and that that book was their book.
I think also it's easy for writers to forget how brave it is to put your words out there. And because we're in this industry all together, right? All of my friends, we're doing the same thing. And I actually forget how extraordinary it is until my husband pulls me back and he says, how terrifying it is what you do for a living, that you put your soul into this thing and then you give it to the entire world to read.
It's so scary. It's so scary. It's so scary. And I don't like, it makes me, it's the only time that I think I envy the writers who don't do it. Because there are some writers that are just like, I'm just having fun and it doesn't hurt me. I'm like, oh, I'm excavating a piece of my heart every single time. Maybe that's not healthy either, but I think we have to. I think those are the books that matter to somebody. Like I'm not the kind of, I think, okay, of the 100, let's say I read 120 books this year. I don't need 120 books to hit me like an arrow to the chest. I need 105 books to just be fun, to just feed me, to just water my garden. And I need 15 books to slightly change the chemistry of who I am as a person. And I think I am not the kind of writer, unfortunately, who writes the book that's just going to make you be like, that was tasty, on to the next. I'm going to be the writer who tries to write the book that makes you hurt afterward for a few weeks. And I think it's so important to know that, like, if you want to just have fun and just write for fun, that's totally valid. If you want to write like a book that is just candy, that's totally valid. It's also brave. It's brave to put yourself on paper in that way. If you want to write a book that just guts you, that is also brave. Also, I'm sorry, welcome to this club. It's a very painful place to be. You will care. You will care, unfortunately, about everything that everyone feels towards you. It is brave. It's so weird too, right? Because we have to take off all of the armor in order to write authentically. And then we're expected to pile all of the armor back on before a book comes out. And like, it's like we had to strip down to write the thing, and then we're expected to be invulnerable when it's received. And that's just truly one of the hardest, scariest, it's the only thing that gets easier.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, do you read your reviews?
No, of course not. But they reach me. This is the thing. I don't seek them out, but they reach me.
Right.
And like, I read enough of them to understand the conversations happening around it, but at the same time, they're not really for me. Because by the time my book comes out, what am I going to do with that information except use it to like castigate myself? Either like, because I'm somebody as well, if I see 100 5-star reviews, I'll find the 1 star. Like I will weaponize the one terrible thing that somebody says against myself. So knowing about myself, it's not as if this revision, as if this feedback is coming in at a point in the process where I can say, okay, you know what? Great note. Let me go revise the back third of that book. There's nothing I can do at this point except hurt myself with the information. So of course, like, I am a very thorough reviser who has a lot of people weigh in before the book comes out. By the time the book comes out, I think reviews exist for readers within the community.
I think that makes a lot of sense.
Do you read reviews?
Oh God, no. But sometimes my husband will go in and he'll do like a kind of a spot, read on Goodreads for me, and he'll pull me the good ones. And strangely enough, one of the best reviews I've gotten, it was like a 2-star review, and it said, this book wasn't for me because I don't like, happy books or whatever, but it is absolutely going to change somebody else's life.
See?
And it's like you said, this book is going to be somebody's favorite. And I love that. But usually I can't look at the reviews because my heart will hurt. I will read 100 5-star reviews, like you said, and then I will see that one, and that's the only one I'll remember. And
I'll scroll till I find the bad thing.
Oh no, that's terrible.
Like if I see like it's usually if it's like a post about my book on like Instagram, I'll scroll past every single nice thing looking for the dissenting opinion. I don't know why I'm built this way. So I have a person in my life who's very dear to me who will, if I need to kind of have a vibe check, she will kind of go in and have a preemptive vibe check and see if it's like safe. Just because, again, most of the time when our books are coming out, we're also working on something new. We're in a constant creative state. And because we might have put the armor back on for the book that's out, but we've taken that armor off for the thing that we're writing now. And so we might forget that we don't actually have any armor on at that moment, or projectiles coming in.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely, absolutely true. All right, I'm going to get to some of our community questions because Creative Inspired Happy is not just a podcast. We're also an online community. And I always ask our community members ahead of time in our group chat if they have any questions for our upcoming guests. And I have to tell you, they were so excited to have you on the show. Not only did I get a bunch of questions, and I can't even ask all of them, but people get to like mark things with emojis. And so usually it's just like a heart. But when I mention your name, they were like exclamation points. Like, I can't believe you're having Victoria on the show.
That makes me so happy. It's hard to be perceived.
No, it's amazing. All right. So I think Evelyn C has a question, and her question is there a part of the writing process for a book that you like the most, and what about your least favorite? And you could put that in the context maybe of Bury Our Bones, since that's what we're talking about.
Drafting is my least favorite, first drafting, and that should be unsurprising to anyone who's listened thus far, because as I said, I am a perfectionist. And so the first draft tends to be very white knuckle, tends to be like, I am very aware that the thing that I'm writing is not what I want it to be, and also that I cannot fix it until I have something. And so the act of a first draft for a perfectionist is just the most grueling experience traditionally, because it's an exercise in like controlled failure. Like, that you are failing at a task, and yet I just can't let it go. I can't accept that it's a zero draft. So first drafting and we don't get along. Like I say, I've learned coping techniques to make it better. I plan my books for almost a year before I write them, so that I kind of assuage that feeling. My favorite is about the last round of revision. because in the last round of revision, this is usually a proofread at this point, like a first pass or a second pass page. So the book is typeset, and I'm going through checking it. And it's the very first time that I read it and suddenly dissociate and feel like a reader instead of the writer. Now, because I'm me, I immediately am like, I can never write this again. Past me wrote this, not future me, and therefore I am useless. I didn't write this, so I don't let myself even take credit for the thing that I wrote, because I'm like, it doesn't exist. Somebody else wrote this book. But there is an extreme relief at that moment. Also, sorry, you see these little dust particles. It's because my cat is like just messing around right out of screen, and it's just apparently has just ejected dust particles. But yeah, that moment when I realized that it's reader worthy, and the moment where I read it as a reader is the most existential relief that I feel, and also the moment when I see it versus the idea that I had, and I realized that I got to that purpose point. I got to the place that I wanted it to be, even though usually for a year and a half, 2 years at that point, I've been convinced I was never going to get there as I worked my way through the draft and the revision.
That is a long time to sit in that kind of suffering with yourself.
It's a long time to be like so self-aware of your own fallibility, of your own, like, I just feel for everybody in my life. I don't know about you, but I like my friends and family can set their watches by the emotional cycle that I go through for those 18 months.
It's interesting for me. After I finish a project, after I've launched something into the world, I have a period of time where I feel just kind of empty, so like a book has come out, but I just don't have it in me yet to write another book. Yeah. And so I give myself some time to rest.
How much time?
Oh, it's usually shorter than I actually intend to. So I always want to say 3 months, 6 months.
Wow, that's good.
But no. But here's what happens. Speaking of like, the loved ones in your life, tracking your emotions, there's a point where I start getting irritable. And that's when my husband, he'll never say anything, but he knows this is the sign. It's about time that I need to sit down and start writing again. And so inevitably, that's when it takes me longer to recognize it than it takes for him to recognize it. But then I sit down. And so it's never 6 months, because I need to be doing something, moving creatively.
Yeah. I roughly go about a week.
Oh my gosh.
Before it becomes like nihilistic, before it becomes like I like, there's a gray fog that you live in, this haze, like grief. When that project is gone, you have spent years, even if it's like, years of dreaming and months of writing, you spent years with this thing occupying space inside of you, and then it's gone. And you're grieving for the characters you don't have in your life anymore. You're grieving for the voice that took you so long to find. You're grieving for the story that you held aloft. It's just gone. And you know that you're not ready for something to fill the space. But the sheer absence left in its wake is so destabilizing that you just like feel null. And I don't do well with that. This one of the reasons I'm glad of this planning window that I have is, like, for instance, even though this is coming out after release, we're filming it like 4 weeks before. 4 weeks before is a bad mental health space, Evelyn, because there's nothing I can do at this point. But I'm actively like in the germination for a book. Even though I'm not ready to write something, I need the like consumptive nature of planning, or else I'm going to just spiral. I'm going to crash out in real time.
Well, I'm glad that, that probably is part of the formula for why you can be so prolific, why you have so many books out, because you have to be doing something artistically.
Yeah, it's relentless. It's for my own self-preservation.
That does make sense. I mean, I'm not mad because we just get more books from you. All right, we have a question from MRM Lane, and that is, do you work in your poetic prose initially, or is that later in the editing phase?
Oh, great question. It's usually part and parcel of my drafting process. Obviously, some lines come in at all stages of revision. Like, whole layers of the book come in the stages of revision. In The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, all of the art came in revision. Like, it did not exist in the first draft, as like, it did not take up space in the story. In Bury Our Bones, I'm trying to think if anything came in revision. Definitely like certain turns of phrase But I do, if you were to look at one of my first drafts, one of the things is my first drafts would resemble somebody else's third or fourth draft just because I'm obsessive about words. Like I need words to taste a certain way. I'm somebody who, if the way that the writing doesn't excite me, I have a hard time pushing through. So that's the reason I can't just do a 0 draft knowing that I'm a perfectionist. It would be easier to just get a bones draft down, right? But I need to be excited by the prose. But I'll be very aware if I'm like, the language here isn't quite what I want it to be. And a great example of that is the last page of the book. I rewrote the last page of Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil after the arcs came out. Because I was happy with the plot. I was happy with the story. I was happy with everything. I wanted different words. The words didn't taste right. So that's something that was like last round of revision. They were so mad at me. Like my editor was like, I cannot believe you're doing this. And I was like, I'm so sorry. She was like, as long as it doesn't take up any more space, because they're very rigid at that point of like, the pages are the pages. But most of the time, most of the big lines that people end up quoting were there in the first draft.
So I'm curious if you've ever gotten any comments from readers about you changing their lives in any way, which I know is kind of a big statement, but let me share first while you think about that, the way you changed my life. And that was when we met, you were on tour. I want to say it was for the Savage song, but that seems like maybe too long ago. I'm not sure. Anyway.
No, that would have been like 2017, 2016.
Yeah, that sounds about right then. Okay.
Yeah.
So I was still early in my career. I was 1 or 2 books in, and you were on stage at Kepler's, my local indie bookstore. And the way that you spoke, you have this very calm confidence about you, which is amazing considering that you talk about having imposter syndrome all the time. Yeah. But it was revelatory to me because I think there's a lot of performance of women artists online where you have to act like the ingenue all the time. You have to say, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is happening to me. Yeah. And it occurred to me watching you talk on stage that you are allowed to own your success. You are allowed to say, hey, I've worked hard. I've earned this spot. And it's a very humble way of doing it that you speak. It's not arrogant the way that some other people might try to. I think some people overcompensate maybe when they're trying to be like, okay, well, now I'm proud, right? Yeah. But anyway, my point being, you showed me the way that I could say, I have achieved this and I'm proud of this, and yet continue to have that humility to grow as an artist. So has anyone else, as I've thoroughly embarrassed you now, so has anyone else ever, have readers come to you and said that, hey, this book changed my life?
I mean, yes, I'll tell you, as much as that means to me, though, it means infinitely more when writers say it. For that reason, I started out, sorry, this is Thomas. He has to be in the shot if there's ever any filming happening. I started out so young, and like, this is the thing. I'm not old, but I've been doing this since I was 19. I sold my first book when I was 21. This is not meant to brag. What I mean by that is, at the time when I was coming into publishing, 2009, 2010, 2011, felt like the only time everyone, oh my God, Thomas, sorry. I felt like the only time people spoke online was to celebrate a victory. And it's incredibly isolating. Like, publishing is already isolating. And so I made a decision there like 15, 16 years ago that I didn't want anyone to feel as lonely as I did in whatever they were going through. And so I made a decision that I was going to be as transparent as I could be and kind of de-romanticize the creative process. And that would allow me to celebrate my victories when they happened with authenticity, but also to speak honestly about the downsides, about the struggles, because publishing will try to make of us an island wherein anything that's happening is only happening to us, and therefore we shouldn't talk to each other about it. And it was just so incredibly lonely that as my platform grew and as I started my newsletter and the podcast and stuff, I just decided, like, I'm going to try and pull back the curtain, because if it can help any other writer feel less alone in their process and feel more at home in their self, then it's worth it. And so, yes, of course, writers come up to me, or readers come up to me, and they tell me what my stories meant, and that means the world. But when writers tell me how important it is to feel seen, to feel less alone, to know that if you're on your first book, somebody who's on their 25th book is basically going through the exact same creative hurdle that I'm sitting down at my desk, you are sitting down at your desk, that we might be at different stages in our career. We might feel like we're on different levels. You might perceive me to be that way, but at the end of the day, we're just sitting across from each other trying to tell stories. And it doesn't really matter where you're at in your journey. If you're showing up, you are sitting with me that whole time, and we are going through it together. And I think that that has been one of the most important things in my career, is just to make sure that other writers feel less alone in whatever they're going through. But I do feel like it has made me really able to own the victories when they happen, because I'm very honest about when they don't. And I think readers have now, and writers have also been with me through all of it. Like, I did not start as a big deal. Addie was my 20th book. Like, my 9th, I think, was my first bestseller. And I early on in my career, I had series canceled. I had a terrible experience in publishing. I did work for hire in middle grade at a time when people were really cruel about it, and they kind of acted like it was less work for hire. For those listening, it's just like when a publisher has a concept and then they hire an author, like a day job, right? To create, to spec. And a lot of writers are a little nasty about it. They act like it's lesser form of content. But you know what? That work for hire work is what allowed me to write Vicious. It's what allowed me to write A Darker Shade of Magic. And I'm very proud of those books. And so I think coming up through all of it and being as honest as I could be through all of it is just, I'm going to celebrate my victories when they happen. I think we deserve to celebrate them. I also think we should talk about when things don't go well. I think we should be honest with each other about when we're struggling, about when we're struggling mentally, as well as creatively, as well as professionally. Like, we should be a community, not a set of islands.
That's amazing. And I completely agree wholeheartedly. All right. So the final question is, what would you like readers to take away from Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil after they're done?
There are some books that you put down when they're done and you're like, yay, I'm really glad that happened. And then you go on with your life. And then there are some books that make you feel something that you immediately need to talk to somebody about. And you take that book and you push it into a friend or family member's hand or stranger on the street, and you say, quick, read this because I need to talk about it. And it doesn't even have to be positive. It's just, you have a lot of feelings and you need a place to put them. And that's kind of what I want people to feel when they read it. Every time I meet someone who's got more than 75 pages left, I'm like, I'm so sorry, congratulations, it's all going to happen. But I want you to feel something when you finish this book. You can feel happy, you can feel frustrated, you can feel vindicated, you can feel passionately, but I want it to be the kind of book where you feel like you immediately need to phone a friend and talk it out.
That's perfect. Thank you so much for being on the show. I cannot wait for everyone to pick up your new book, which is out now. And good luck with getting through the publicity phase and with this nihilistic phase of not having anything to do. I can't wait for more stories. But for now, everyone, this book is available everywhere that you can find books. Thank you, Victoria.
Thank you, Evelyn.
Want more writing advice and career insight? Join thousands for free at creativeinspiredhappy.com to go behind the scenes with best-selling authors and get access to our book club for writers, creativity challenges, and more. I can't wait to see you there.